listeners love your work, and I'm David Kadavy. I'm here to help you find the clues that will lead you to your calling. Today's guest found his calling after backpacking around Asia. Vinnie Lauria had just sold a company. He had just gotten married. He feared that if he spent a year traveling, he'd run out of money and he'd run out of momentum, and he worried it would be career suicide. But his wife, Kristine, pushed him to seize the day. They sold everything, gave up their apartment in the Mission, and hopped on a one-way flight across the Pacific, planning to come back in a year. Throughout his travels, Vinnie kept doing what he does best. He was meeting with entrepreneurs everywhere he went: Korea, Japan, China, Indonesia, India, you name it, all over Asia. Along the way, he stumbled across a unique opportunity. He noticed there was a gap in funding for entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia. All the venture capital firms were risk-averse and didn't invest with a Silicon Valley mindset. Meanwhile, there was an explosion of early-stage startups hungry for funding. So, with no investment experience to speak of, Vinnie partnered up with some friends and started a venture capital firm. Golden Gate Ventures is an early-stage VC firm in Southeast Asia. They've invested $60 million in over 30 companies in 7 countries, including TradeGecko and Redmart. He and Kristine now live in Singapore with their 2 children. They never did move back to San Francisco. And Vinnie is a really close friend of mine. A year after I moved to California, I was pretty lost. I didn't like living in San Jose, and I didn't like the direction my startup was going in, and I couldn't bear to just give up and move back to Nebraska. Meanwhile, San Francisco was just up the road. If I just only had the courage to make the move. And right around that time, I met Vinnie, and I spent a lot of time with him and his now wife, Kristine. And they were both really adventurous and had a bold perspective on living life. And I did move up to San Francisco and fulfilled a lifelong dream of finally living in a big, bustling city. And Vinnie always offered inspiration when I needed it. You'll see he's not afraid to do things that many people consider risky. He values adventure, and he's a big advocate of putting yourself in a situation where you just have no choice but to succeed. As Vinnie likes to say, when you jump, the net appears. Listen to this episode for inspiration on making big changes in your life. Vinnie will share his story of quitting a secure job at IBM and moving across the country with no plan. We'll talk about how he used to live and work with as many as 12 people in a 3-bedroom apartment. He'll share his unique methods for managing the roughly 1,000 new people that he meets every year and how best to connect with them. Overall, you'll hear how a guy from Long Island ended up founding a VC firm in Singapore. Here's Vinnie Lauria. When you're billing your clients, the last thing you want to waste your time and mental energy on is creating invoices. FreshBooks customers get paid an average of 5 days faster. Get your free 30-day trial at kadavy.net/FreshBooks. I'm here with Vinnie Lauria of Golden Gate Ventures, and I think the investment world can be a little bit mysterious sometimes. So can you kind of describe like what Golden Gate Ventures is?
Pretty simple. Venture capital firm. We're focused in Southeast Asia. We're early stage, so Series A deals, companies raising a few $100,000 up to a few million.
Okay, so basically your job is to hang out in Asia and travel around.
Yeah, so I can boil it down to, the day-to-day is pretty awesome, where I get to meet entrepreneurs, ones we invested in, ones that we haven't. And basically, I'd say I split my time between looking for new companies, and it's less looking and it's just more meeting with lots of companies, and then helping the portfolio. And the questions you could get range in everything, like, somebody has to fire somebody for the first time. I remember one team took out all the founders for like drinks the first time they had to fire somebody because, you're young kids. That's kind of difficult going through and what to expect afterwards. To, negotiating acquisitions offers in like hundreds of millions of dollars and trying to help companies with, how to put your best foot forward in terms of strategy and how to, really knock into their head that their valuation is this kind of magic pixie dust, and there's many different ways to make you sound. If we're an investor, we're trying to make the company sound higher. If we're looking to invest, we're usually trying to make the company sound lower, but tend to be pretty entrepreneurial friendly.
Yeah, and So what? Oh gosh, I lost my train of thought already. I'm so like outside of that world that I hardly understand what's going on most of the time. So you guys have been around for, what is it, like 4 years or so? Am I getting that right?
About 4 years, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm so inside the world that I totally forget what it's like to be looking.
Oh yeah,
at
you're
the
like, it's
outside.
simple as a venture capital firm. Which, I mean, even I've like worked for venture capital VC-backed companies and stuff, and so I have some sense of what goes on with them. But yeah, I think so. You were saying like $100,000 investments or so. Usually a company that kind of has some traction already. They're in Southeast Asia, and where are they getting their funding earlier on for, like, from angels and seed?
From angels. So, that's, I mean, I've been out here almost 6 years. And the reason why was when I was actually backpacking out here in 2010.
Wait, have we mentioned that you're in Singapore, by the way?
No.
Yeah,
So I'm in Singapore. I'm on the equator. You might be able to see by the video because it's very hot in here. So I'm in Singapore, been out here since 2010. Used to live in San Francisco with some very fortunate friends, including the one I'm speaking to right now.
Yeah, that was fun.
But literally just ended up here by taking a little break, taking some time. I just gotten married. So my wife, Kristine, and I started backpacking with this kind of lofty goal of let's travel the globe. Let's take a year, explore Latin America, Europe. We had a dream of living in, because we spent our honeymoon in Buenos Aires. So we wanted to go back there and live in Buenos Aires. And live in Italy and live in all these places. And basically when we set off, we literally just went west from San Francisco. So that first stop was Korea, which was awesome. The only thing I knew was Korean barbecue. And I was like, oh, that's all Korean food. And then you're just open to this whole new world of culture and flavor and experience. And then we went west from Korea to China. And then when you're 2010 wasn't that long ago, but that was my first time in China. As an American, you kind of have this idea of socialism, communism, but it's really capitalism 2.0. And so it was in China that, to me, Europe, the US, Latin America all felt the same in terms of then just kind of, Western European languages and food and styles and culture, that they all just kind of became one all of a sudden. So that was what really turned my world upside down, made me say like, wow, there's so much different things here I want to explore. So we ended up spending 3 months in China. We never made it anywhere to Europe or Latin America because after China, we said, let's just explore the rest of Asia. And we would try to spend a month per country. And then kind of fast forward to how I ended up in Southeast Asia was, so just being a geek by nature, wanting to know, hey, what's happening in a startup scene? That was my world. So I wasn't on the investor side before, so I didn't speak that language. But I wanted to have drinks with locals or have a dinner with locals. So we did that 2 different ways. Couch surfing, and I almost kind of used it as not even to crash on people's couches, but just to say, does anybody, like, your profile seems cool, do you want to grab drinks? And that was actually the search filter I would search, was like people that had drinks as like their hobbies or whatever.
Yeah, that's an option on couch surfing too. You can say, well, I don't have a couch available, but I'm up for coffee or drinks too.
Coffee, yeah. So we met a ton of people that way, and that was amazing. So that was one way we met locals, which to me was we had the best experiences in these small little towns and cities that you would never go to, that there's nothing touristy there, but because we met some really great people, and there's people I'm friends with now on Facebook and I run into while I'm traveling around. And then the second way was I would look up the startup scene, which was like co-working spaces, event lists, and just sometimes blast a group. My partner here, Gongate, I met because he was a popular blogger and had a Twitter account. I reached out to him and then he responded over email. So that was my way of, again, just connecting with locals with no intention of doing anything out here. But then I was pretty fortunate getting a cross section of like what's happening in China, India, Southeast Asia. And so going back to your question of, like where are people getting money? Because I kind of just jumped straight into that, was basically in China in 2010, there was tons of activity, huge technology firms, the equivalents of the Googles, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. In India, there was tons of decently funded startups. VC firms from the US like Sequoia were there. But in Southeast Asia, there was nobody. And there was very, very few angel investors. And so that was kind of aha light bulb moment for me was like, oh, I can see the same sort of development. That's the one thing about being in Asia. So I grew up in New York, where I always thought New York was fast paced. And New York has a lot of construction and it's always being overdone. But no matter where you are in Asia, China probably is number one, but no matter where you are, the world is just always changing around you. Buildings are going up. You see construction cranes in every direction. New subway lines come online every year. So that was kind of like a universal constant I saw around the region. Everybody has a smartphone these days, because even a few years ago, because you can get them for like $80. In Indonesia, it was BlackBerry at the time. That was really popular. But I remember being in a small little town on the far corner of Java, and we were taking a ferry somewhere else. And we're at a mall, at a coffee shop, and I would check in on Foursquare so that I would know places that I liked. And I was like, oh, this is a cool little coffee shop if I'm ever back through this town. Check in on Foursquare, and then it's like there's 4 other people checked in around you within this mall. And that was just another kind of enlightening moment of like the rate that people are adopting the tech and the social aspect of it. That's universal around the world. So kind of saw huge development, same sort of mobile engagement, if not higher mobile engagement here, because people don't have a desktop computer, a laptop, or a majority of people don't. But there was no investors, no angel investors. There was very few at the time, definitely no VC. And so then that was just like, oh, I wonder if I can be that plug. That's the problem and opportunity. Like I can see where the next few years are going. There just needs to be somebody to fill in the money. I wonder if I can be one cog in that wheel.
Yeah, so you traveled around and you saw all that development happening in Asia. And then at the same time, just because I think that you generally like to meet people, and you were traveling around and meeting people, and you've also are very interested in entrepreneurship. We can go back to like, some of the stuff that you did back in Silicon Valley. And then you're having like events. Didn't you have like a super happy dev house or two? Did you throw one?
So that means, yeah, I did. So when, again, so rewind 2010 to 2011, backpacking, literally just trying to unplug. But then I came through Singapore. I met my now partner, but I didn't know, we were just dating at first. I didn't know we were going to be partners. Met him at a coffee shop. He ended up inviting me back to Singapore to mentor for the Founders Institute. And so I ended up coming back a second time. And then I think he invited me a third time. And so with each trip I was coming back, I was like, Singapore feels like a pretty hot scene. That's about it. Sorry, Singapore didn't feel like a hot scene, but it felt like it was about to be a hot scene. And then a friend I met here who is Singaporean, who now lives in San Francisco, his goal was always to get to the Valley. So it's kind of funny. We swapped. We just started talking about how San Francisco is different than Singapore. And I threw out, I was like, oh, there's this one event, Super Happy Dev House, where it's like just a party. Like, people are hacking away, but it's like social. It really started off in somebody's house. And he had heard about it. And he's like, yeah, that sounds so cool. And then it just came from us at a cafe being like, oh, we should do this in Singapore. And so then emailed the David Weekly and the guys behind Super Happy Dev House and said, hey, can I do this in Singapore? And they were like, sure, go ahead. And so we did. And so that was one event that I think we had like 160 people come out. So it was huge. We did it over a weekend in a coffee shop. I forget all this, but like we went through tons of beer, tons of coffee. People hacked. One of the companies that started at that Super Happy Dev, or one of the projects, which doesn't exist anymore, I ended up investing in their company like 2 years later. So it kind of had some magical components of it as well. But that was something that I think I was very fortunate with the timing of doing an event like that. We had people flying into Singapore from Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. So from like neighboring countries, it was just the right event at the right time. And that then plugged me into so many more people. And is there was many nails in the coffin to have me attracted to Southeast Asia, and that was one of them.
Yeah, and it like you were there at the right time, and then you also got to become a catalyst. And as far as encouraging some entrepreneurship to go on there, but then also you became the first venture capital fund there, or
not the first, but the first Silicon Valley bent venture capital fund. And what that means is has a high appetite for risk. There were investors here, but they were kind of conservative. There were some that were attached to like family conglomerates and things of that nature. And so maybe they would invest and take 60% of the company. And that's not like a Silicon Valley mindset. So I would say we were definitely, I would be comfortable to say we were the first Silicon Valley minded VC firm.
Yeah. And I think that you were well equipped to seize this opportunity in part because of some of the work that you were doing in Silicon Valley. Like you were organizing the SF, or didn't you start the SF New Tech meetup?
Close, the Silicon Valley New Tech meetup. So there was an SF.
Okay. Yeah.
SF1 as well. That was started by Miles. And that I owe credit to Scott, the CEO of Meetup.com, because I used to live in New York, and I would go to the New York New Tech meetup. With the ideas, I was at IBM. I knew I wanted to quit IBM. So what's going on in the startup scene in New York? But always had the hunkering, like many people, to be in San Francisco. You know, when the .com boom was happening, I was basically in high school and college, so it wasn't on the East Coast. So never got to participate in it, but always followed it really closely. And so in like early 2004, could kind of feel things starting to pick up again. I mean, Facebook was probably just in a handful of colleges at that time. So that's why I started going to the New York New Tech meetup. And then I decided, you know what, I want to make the jump. And can definitely talk a little bit about that on a side story, but then moved from New York to San Francisco. And then again, just like I asked David Weekley, could I do, like, this was an awesome event, can I do this? I asked Scott, like, hey, that was an awesome event. Can I do a Silicon Valley version of it? And he's like, yeah, sure. And he did me a solid. He's like, you know what, I'll introduce you to one of our VC firms there, and they can be a host once it gets big enough. So the first event was in a coffee shop, and it was just 5 people. And so as somebody hosting a meetup where I came from New York, where it was like 100 plus people, 5 people, it was a little anxious and stressful, being like, oh my God, this is not big enough, and how are people going to take it? But that first event was cool. It was fun. It was basically just people generally interested. And again, I was fortunate enough in timing to be kind of ahead of the curve. There weren't millions of meetups on Python, JS, and all these other things. It was like, there was no other meetup. So it was the opportunity to kind of plug in at the right time as things started picking up again. That started growing pretty quickly. I think we probably met around the early time. When did we first meet? When did you move out to the Valley?
I moved out sometime in like around August 26, 2005. And
okay.
I believe that you and I met at a super happy dev house in like February 2006 or something at David Weekley's house. And there were people from like Neil Kumar, who became director of engineering at Yelp, or something like VP of engineering at Yelp. And a few people were there. It was really, I met a lot of great people that day. So that's where we met. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, why it was an awesome event. Yeah. We met there. We're good friends there. There's so many stories like that at these super happy dev house events. So the meetup took off in a fashion that was really, really small. Scott helped me out. So I think by month 3 or month 4, we got big enough that we were like 20 plus people. We did our first event at DLA. I remember it was our first or second event. The CEO of Meebo, Sequoia-backed company, this might have been before it was backed by Sequoia, which had like it wasn't Meebo, different company. They presented it well. CEO of IMView, Eric Ries, where everybody knows Eric Ries because presented. And because he had IMView, and it was basically, and I knew about him from his previous startup, probably through David Weekley. I think they worked together. And so I knew that he was like really well respected, but he was out there presenting, and I would say it wasn't going over so well for the crowd. And I think it was because his software was used basically by teenagers, and it was kind of like chat rooms with 3D avatars. And I think for the audience, it either didn't resonate with them in terms of socially, why would people use this? Or like, how is this a startup that would be get funded? But I remember afterwards, because of, I could just feel in the room, knowing the respect he should have gotten and didn't see that, I went up and I gave like a little 2-minute spiel on like why I thought what he was doing was pretty amazing. And that little thing turned in, felt good or whatever. And so I ended up making that a part of every time a company presented, we'd have 4 a night. I would always afterwards give a little 1-minute talk about what really stood out to me. And that became kind of a little unique quality of our meetup that was very different than the others. And people would always come up to me and tell me that they loved it because it was just to keep it positive. But it all came from Eric Ries and just having a disconnect from people not.
I think you have kind of a talent or an inclination towards almost like collecting people. Like you run these events, these meetups, and you build up a lot of human capital that way. You did the same thing when you were doing all the traveling. And I remember meeting you in Silicon Valley, and you had like a really interesting way of organizing all of your contacts. Do you still
I still do
that?
to this day.
Okay.
I still do to this day.
Are you willing to share?
Yeah, 100%. So I started this. Actually, I probably started when I was in New York at the New York New Tech meetup, where I would be meeting so many people, and I was like, I want to remember who they are, and a little nugget of how I can remember them. So I started in New York with the New York Tech meetup. When I moved out to San Francisco, technically Palo Alto, I started doing the same thing. Every time I met somebody, I'd take their business card, I would type their name, their email, how we met, and one little nugget, and a date we met, and a nugget of information to remember. And so now this has continued for like 12 years. And so I've created new spreadsheets, and now I'm on Google Docs instead of Excel. But I still use it. Now I have a plugin with like Zapier and like all these different sort of plugins. And I can do all these different things, MailChimp and things with it. But it's been, so I don't know if I'd recommend that, but it's been super helpful to me for a few reasons. So now in my world, and so this is where I feel really fortunate, being the VC venture capital business to me is a relationship business. It's not that I have a finance background or understand anything about money. It's just at the end of the day, we're helping our companies by making introductions to them. So leveraging your network, which only is maturing and growing over time, is super important. So this spreadsheet has actually been really, really valuable. And what ends up happening is I don't even remember somebody's name. Or I don't remember, because I meet a lot of people, and I remember, I met them at this dinner in this city around this month. And so I can actually search my spreadsheet and find them, and then email them. And maybe that sounds a little cheesy, but I probably meet over 1,000 contacts a year. So maybe not that many, but definitely in the high hundreds that need a way to kind of just maintain and organize and be able to recall and remember. And it's really funny when I look back on somebody like, hey, how did I meet David McAdoo before the end of the call? David Kadavian, like what little notes I write about them. So, I mean,
it's funny to me that you haven't found an app that works for you on this. Have you tried?
I've tried so many apps. All the apps make it so like they're so like insightly, contextually. I've paid for them, use them. They're all just so heavy and slow, and they all fail on the search. At the end of the day, the biggest thing is I need to say like, oh, I met this person at Geeks on a Plane, and search that, and then get a result set. They all fail on that search. They only have search built in on like first name or last name. They don't have it on any additional notes or tags or locations and things like that. So they all fail on the ability to retrieve a contact the way I want to retrieve it.
Mm-hmm. And
they may have some elements to search, but nothing good.
And you used to throw really great parties in Silicon Valley, and I remember there being a field on your spreadsheet, I think, that helped you with that.
So I still have a field, which is a party flag, which I say, yes, this is a person I want to invite to parties, which we still do today. So like we just threw a huge F1 part for Formula One out here. We had like 200 people. We had yachts over the weekend. We had a presidential suite overlooking the race. And the way people get selected for that is like, yeah, have they been marked on the party flag? So if you meet me randomly in this world, try to stand out and be interesting, so I can give you a check on the party flag to say,
yeah,
you need to come to our party.
People probably are wondering what's the criteria for deciding whether you want to invite somebody to a party or not.
It's a scale, because like I want like important. There's on one side there's important people, but somebody could be a little too stuffy and important, so then they don't kind of make the party click. And then somebody could be completely young, junior, no sort of experience, but they tell an interesting story, or they just tend to be the life of a party and definitely want them. So it's an odd little scale, but it's something I still use. I love that you remembered all this stuff, because I think I'm probably pretty unique. And now I've kind of incorporated it into the business, and we have other contacts that are getting kind of flagged, and other people that are meeting people with this. And I've even thought about building our own software since now we're using it as a company. But so far, the spreadsheet has gotten 80% of the work done.
Have you got
but
any
going
sense
back,
of? I was going to say, have you got any sense of whether the party flag has any? Does anything to predict whether or not somebody is good to invest in or not?
No, definitely not at all. We've invested in people that I would say wouldn't be good with the party flag, and then there's people that the party flag, and I'm like, would not invest in them.
Might even be an inverse correlation.
I think no correlation. But I was going to say, going back to the party thing, so, the whole meetup, when I look back on my life, I realized, when I was younger, I was much more introverted, especially in high school. I had closer groups of friends, didn't really socialize with lots of other different types of groups. And it was probably college where I went through that transformation. And probably for anybody that does go through that change, it probably is in college where you're really just open to a lot of new people and experiences. And so I would say halfway through college, that's where then started throwing just tons of house parties. And so when I look back, I kind of see this kind of idea of bringing people together and throwing parties started back in college, and we would just do these massive house parties that people would know about. And then when I look at Paul Briegel, who David, really well, has helped me start Golden Gate, has worked with me in a bunch of different companies. He's also a person like that. And if I'm here, Paul is over here in terms of just bringing people together.
Much higher is the signal that you just made.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm on video. Yeah. Paul's on another level, but all of it's in his mind. He doesn't have a spreadsheet. And I'm always like, how do you do that without he just knows and he can recall anything and people, and he meets people on every corner of the earth. So it's kind of funny that we connected up. And so I've definitely learned a lot from him. I think I've also had just a lot of that intuitively inside of me for some reason. But that party gene or just bringing people together has been around since college.
So you did a bunch of traveling. You saw the opportunity. You had built up a lot of human capital. You have the skill and the inclination to do the relationship part of a business like this. And then you met this person who would make a good business partner. How did you then start a VC? It just seems like I would have no idea how to begin.
And neither did I. Every year of my life, no matter what I've ever done, I always look back and just randomly, I'm just like, wow, 1 year ago, I thought I knew everything, and I can see how much I've learned in 1 year. And so that's true right now. If I look back a year ago, I'm like, wow, there's so much I didn't know 1 year ago, and it kind of feels like I know everything I need to know now. So how did I start it? I would just say ignorant optimism. So you're and I think that's every entrepreneur journey in the world. You're optimistic about what the future holds, and you're ignorant about all the stuff you don't need to know. Because in reality, I think if you weren't ignorant, you would never start it. If I knew all the problems and all the headaches and the red tape and delays and issues we'd run into, I don't think I would have started. I would have been like, wow, that's overwhelming. There's no way I can do that, or I don't want to put myself through that. So going into VC, I think is for any entrepreneur, even if you're going to start a tuxedo business and you don't know anything about it, but that's what you want to do. I think it's kind of going into it with an optimism and a little bit of ignorance. And then it's just learning as you go along. And so, cutting through that, would I have been able to start a new VC firm in Silicon Valley? No. It was too competitive. There's too many established platforms. So I was able to go at it ignorantly yet optimistic in an environment where there wasn't a lot of competition, in an environment where the timing was right, in an environment where it was needed. So this is the classic entrepreneur problem is, market timing. Are you too early or too late? So if I was in a saturated market, if I was in China, I wouldn't be on a successful platform right now, but I was in the right place. I was very fortunate with timing, right place at the right time.
We're going to take a quick break. As a solopreneur, I want maximum impact with minimum effort. Any chance that I get to clone myself, I take it. That's why I love ActiveCampaign. With ActiveCampaign, I can build incredibly sophisticated email marketing campaigns that run themselves. I can have a big impact on my email subscribers. I can make sales. And meanwhile, I'm free to build more cool things. It's really like having a clone. With ActiveCampaign, I can build automations that do just about anything. It's just like running a program, but ActiveCampaign's drag and drop editor makes it easy. You can see visually exactly how your campaign works. The best part is ActiveCampaign is actually cheaper than my old ESP. I really wish I would have started with them. So try out ActiveCampaign for free for 14 days. Go to cadavy.net/AC for your free trial. That's cadavy.net/AC to claim your 14-day free trial. I'm curious, when you and Kristine went on your trip, did you have any visions about like what you thought you would do when you were done?
No vision. So yeah, let me go into that. So I literally, up until a few months into the trip, really thought it was we're going around the world and go back to San Francisco and start another company in San Francisco. When Lauria was acquired in 2010, I remember me and Kristine had got married in 2009. We had been talking about doing a big trip. I even printed out a huge map on the wall that I was coloring in, sort of like the community chest and like local towns do, to say like, this is how much we have saving and here's a goal so we can start traveling. So we always had this kind of, around the time we were getting married, like at some point in the future, we need to take a huge worldwide trip. So that was the thought. The acquisition happened. And then it was like, okay, this is the opportunity to do it. I didn't want to leave right after Lauria was acquired because I was figuring there was an opportunity cost I was missing out. I was like, this is momentum I could ride to do something next because it's a good story. And if I unplug from Silicon Valley, I'm going to be way behind when I come back 1 year later. So that was the feeling I had. And if for anybody that knows Kristine, which you do incredibly well, she was the irrational rash, like, we have to do this now or we're never going to do it. And like, you know, in her words, like we'd be like ripping off a Band-Aid. And so literally within 1 month of the company getting acquired, we had packed up all of our stuff. And I think we technically left maybe 2 months after. But it was like a very quick, to me, rash decision in terms of, let's sell all our stuff. We did put it up on Craigslist yard sale. So there was nothing holding us back. Let's end our lease, kind of say our goodbyes. I'll talk about the going away party in a second. And so what I wanted to do next was just basically take a year off, come back to San Francisco. But obviously, yeah, that changed. And so I feel incredibly fortunate to travel where we traveled at the time when we were traveling.
Yeah. And it's funny because you had this fear of like it would be like career suicide in a way of leaving Silicon Valley, right? And now, do you ever really think about how things would have turned out, or?
No, I think I'm happy with the success of Golden Gate Ventures today. So I never had a goal of being. I think in the back, any entrepreneur in the back of your head, you're always like, oh wow, the other side, being the investor, is pretty cool. They seem like cool. 80% of VCs actually are not. I don't think too highly of, but there's 20% that I do. But as the entrepreneur, you're kind of like, oh, that would be kind of cool when I'm older, someplace later. So I never had the immediate short-term goal of being a VC. If I think where life would be, I think it would be very different. I definitely would not be in the VC space in the Valley. I don't know where I would be. I just think it would be very different. I feel super happy and fortunate for what I'm doing. Like going back to all of my experiences and, you know, going from like more of a geeky computer engineer to then more product person to now more investor person, an evolution of kind of my skills and talent. I'm really happy here. I like this, but I can't imagine what it would have been like on the other side.
Yeah, and so
if I had stayed.
You kind of felt like maybe it was career suicide. What were some of the other fears what do you think was holding you back from making the leap then, besides the career suicide? Or in addition to it?
It's also scary. I would say it's also a little bit scary, like traveling to places, don't know, traveling for a year, how much it's going to cost us, are we going to burn through all of our savings? We're 30 years old, we just got married. Should we be saving for a house and a family, or should we be blowing it all, experiencing life? So that was also kind of an anxiety that was rolling around. Fortunately, for me, I have an awesome wife who's probably more extreme than me in terms of, fuck it, let's just enjoy things.
I agree with that. Yeah, so you didn't really have a plan, and it seems like it worked out fine. Now, the other day I came across I had in my notes, I don't know where I got it from, but your resignation letter to IBM. I read that, and that must have been 2005 or 2004 or something. And in it,
2004.
In it, you're saying, I'm leaving IBM. I'm going to Silicon Valley because I've got a great opportunity in the social media space there. I think social media is going to really be connecting people in the future. And by the way, in your retrospective, you're saying actually there was no opportunity. I was just moving.
Yeah, so this is kind of funny. So when I like to, if you look at my life from the outside, you're just like, oh, Vinnie made these jumps and he was comfortable and confident in that. But this is a really good story of, no, I wasn't. So I worked at IBM for about 3.5 years. I knew I kind of reached my peak there when I spent part of a year working in an internship program, a research lab in North Carolina. I was like, wow, this is awesome. This reminds me of startups again, because I had worked as the web developer for startups in high school and college. And so I was like, I want to get back into that. So that encouraged me to say I want to leave IBM. And then once that happened, I didn't have the gumption to say I want to leave and just start my own company. My view was I need to leave and join a startup. So then I started applying everywhere. LinkedIn, which was really small at the time, like a small team, not big like it was.
You mentioned LinkedIn in your resignation letter, and it was like it must have just started then.
Yeah. And so I was applying at places like these, and 2 companies had flown me across the country to the West Coast, LinkedIn being one of them, to say, hey, let's do a deeper interview. And so basically I was at IBM. I had these companies that showed more than one level, but kind of a second level of interest to me. And then all of a sudden I had this thing at IBM where I was a consultant for them and they could place me anywhere around the country. Normally it was always in New York City. This time they wanted me to go to Ohio, and I didn't want to go to Ohio. And they always told us, if you don't want to do a project, you can just tell your manager no. So that's what I did. And then all of a sudden I realized I have like 4 different levels of managers, and everybody kept pushing on me that I had to go. So it came to a position of, I don't know what I have next, but I'm knowing I want to leave and I don't want to get placed on this new engagement. I should just quit now so that in one scenario, I get a job and I have a little bit break and I can take some time off and enjoy things. And in the worst case scenario, I don't get the job offers, but now my back is against the wall and I'm forced to do something. And so now the resignation letter comes in. So basically I made that decision. All right, I'm going to resign. 1 or 2 scenarios going to happen. But from talking to my basically direct managers, my peers, none of them could kind of understand. Like for my closest friends, I would kind of say like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing next. But I realized once I got a little bit outside of that circle in IBM, nobody could understand why you would leave IBM without knowing what you're doing next. So I had to basically lie to my managers, to the people while I was resigning, and say I had another offer in order for me to kind of exit gracefully, if that makes sense. So I was scared shitless when that was happening. I didn't know the outcome. Put in my resignation letter. It was late 2004. Within 2 weeks of resigning, I got basically, we're not hiring you letters from the companies I was meeting with. And so I was like, okay, this is now plan B. My back is against the wall. So I kind of forced my hand by putting myself in that situation. And I was like, all right, now I have to, my dream is to be out in San Francisco. So just like we left San Francisco, packed everything up in less than a month in New York, moved out to San Francisco, said I don't have a lot of savings. So I was living in a hostel for almost 2 months with like a shared bathroom down the hall, which I hadn't had since like my freshman year of college. And it was at that time that I reconnected with Paul Bragiel. So I'd met him I can even go into that backstory. In Chicago, as a Metro user of the startup I joined a few months prior, he had just moved to Palo Alto. They were looking to raise money. I just moved to San Francisco. We reconnected. Basically, I'm living in a hostel, so I needed housing. I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I even posted ads on Craigslist, almost like a dating ad, like, hey, I want to start a company. I don't know what it is, but I'm looking for other like-minded people. I met like now superstars of the Valley, like Jared Kopf, who started a whole bunch of companies since then, and has like worked with Max Levchin. I met him via Craigslist, an ad like that. And he reached out and like, hey, why don't we meet for coffee and talk? This is 2004, so it wasn't like too hot of a scene at the time. It was just starting to pick back up. And so then I met Paul, reconnected with Paul. And so he fulfilled like, basically there was 6 guys living in a 3-bedroom house. And so I could sleep on the floor in one of the bedrooms. So that would be better than being in a hostel. Could get to join a pretty early startup and just be considered then part of the founding team. And so I ended up joining Metro, again, with the idea, just went out there not knowing what was going to happen, wanting to start my own thing, willing to join something else. Fast forward, a year and a half later, we ended up shutting down Metro, raised a little money, but through a lot of awesome parties, met a lot of awesome people, started another company after that. But yeah, so my leaving IBM was basically, I forced my hand. So that's I've had a few life lessons. I would say the 3 biggest life lessons have been when I left IBM, which was really scary to leave. And I'm here in Asia, and every, person that I meet, especially in Singapore, is like, well, in America, that's kind of normal, but our parents wouldn't allow us to do it here. And I was like, that's true for American parents. Like, I remember the first person I ever told when I wanted to leave IBM was my parents. I remember sitting down at my parents' house, and my mom thought it was crazy and was like screaming at me and like, why would you leave this? It's such a great company. Because for their generation, IBM was like the job you were at for the rest of your life. My dad was a little bit more understanding because he runs his own business, kind of a glazier installation company. So he understood it, but I remember fighting with my mom and she thought it was crazy. And Paul Brago was actually influential in me leaving IBM because I had met him in Chicago because I was there for a wedding as a user of Metro. We met up so this is before I joined, we met up for beers, and basically it was supposed to be like an hour kind of coffee. We ended up drinking all afternoon. And by the time I left, he had me convinced to leave IBM and moved down to Brazil and lived there for 6 months. So Paul also had a huge influence in that inspiration. And so I try to be like that now when I meet young people, just to be inspiring to say, there is a different world than what we feel we're taught and what is normal. And you just have to jump. So the life lesson was one, leaving IBM, and everything ended up being okay. And so somebody said a quote to me that's always stood out, which is just jump and the net will appear. And I'm a big believer of that. If you just jump in life, you will land safely and probably bigger opportunity will happen. The second life lesson was when we had to shut down Metro. And so to go back to our investors and say, hey, we're shutting this down, it's not working out. Some of our investors reinvested in our third company. So that life lesson was basically when people are investing, and now I try to imbibe that this is a kind of long-term proposition, and you're investing in people, not just ideas. And sometimes the ideas don't work out, but the people still show possibility. That was the second. And then the third life lesson comes back to my leaving IBM, and that was me being here in Singapore, which was going back to, why would I knew nothing about VC. I had a very minimal network here in Asia. Why would I start a new company, let alone a VC firm? And so to me, that's the same power. It just reinforced the lesson of leaving IBM that if you just put yourself in a situation that you see something positive that could be an outcome, you'll figure it out as you go along.
I see it as kind of a way of creating the conditions for luck to happen. We had one of the Cards Against Humanity co-founders on, Max Temkin, and he was talking about how his grandpa would always say, well, everybody gets lucky every once in a while, but you've got to be like smart when you're lucky. And I think that when you put yourself in those situations, you create the conditions for serendipity to happen, for sort of lucky things to happen that you can then seize upon. So which, like, in the case of Cards Against Humanity, they created this game that everybody loved playing, and then they seized the opportunity. In your case, you were traveling and you saw this opportunity. There was some luck involved in that, but you were smart enough and gutsy enough to take the steps to take advantage of it. And you mentioned.
If I could just
go ahead.
Throw in one quote, so I just brought it up. There's a really interesting guy. His name is Matthew Marchery, and I read a piece by him, and he described life as you can either do it two ways. It's either there is a pond, a lake, and everybody's trying to swim across the lake, and whoever gets there first is kind of the winner. Or his view of life is there's a raging river, and whoever gets across the side is the winner. But in the raging river scenario, you don't have to be the fastest. Your only instinct is to survive. And having the instinct to survive will naturally get you across the river. And so that always stood out to me. So yeah, if you put, and I think that's also what the guy about Cards Against Humanity is saying. I think you put yourself in those situations where more primal things need to kick in, and everything you do is you need to survive. Again, your back is against the wall. I think you will be more successful.
And it's interesting that when you were mentioning Paul being sort of a catalyst for you, he was definitely a catalyst for me, as were you, because when I met you, you were working at Metro, which, just by the way, for people who don't know, it was, well, I'm sure almost nobody knows, it was like it was like a location-based instant messaging service, and you said you had six guys living and working in a 3-bedroom apartment, but I think when I met you, it was like 12. And
yeah, we
Paul wasn't paying a salary. It was all equity, but all the food was paid for, all the beer was paid for or something. It was like a little frat house or something. And the energy there was awesome. Like the Metro logo was painted on the fireplace mantle and everything. It was just so exciting to me coming from Nebraska and seeing that for the first time. So that was, and you guys had a, what was it? That was the, what was the thing that you took on Beta Breakers? The rickshaw.
Oh, rickshaw. Oh my God, we don't have that anymore, but we had that for so many years. We had an actual rickshaw from India this is a funny little, oh man, I love thinking of all these old stories. There was an art gallery in Palo Alto that had this really famous Indian artist there who does paintings of rickshaws. And so as part of the exhibit, they actually imported a rickshaw from Calcutta or something like that. My friend, who I probably met on Mitra or whatever, the art gallery needed to store the rickshaw somewhere for another exhibit, knew we had a garage, so we said we could store it in the garage. She then left the art gallery, and they kind of forgot where the rickshaw was being stored. So we ended up owning this rickshaw, and we would take it around Palo Alto, and we'd take it out at night. People would know us as who were those crazy rickshaw people. We'd pick people up from bars, take them to different places. We got pulled over by the cops twice because, rickshaws aren't supposed to be driving on the road or being pulled on the road. And then we took it to events like Beta Breakers, and it was a fun toy to have.
I think I remember one time you and we were with Megan. I don't know if we went across. Did we give her a ride home? I don't remember what happened, but then we ended up parking it in front of a bagel shop as it was opening, because we'd been up and out that late that the sun was coming up and the bagel shop was opening, and so we just parked it.
Yeah, I remember that. Probably because bagel shops open at 5 a.m. Or they start making bagels at 5 a.m.
Yeah. All right. So I guess I'll start wrapping things up here. What's the biggest compromise that you've had to make to get where you
are? Biggest compromise. Going back to, everything I've been talking about. So when I was Southeast Asia and Singapore is where it's at. So maybe I haven't had to make a compromise, but Kristine has. That was not what she was thinking as, okay, this is the be all end all. So it's definitely been a challenging family dynamic. Things so I would say Kristine's been making probably the larger compromise there.
Okay. So your compromise is your spouse not having what she wants.
Yeah, because if you're used to a San Francisco lifestyle in terms of friends and people and everything you can do and places you can go, Singapore is very different. And there are other places in Asia that would have have experiences that would be just as unique or just as crazy. But, I would say here in Southeast Asia and Singapore, it doesn't have that feeling.
Mm-hmm. And when have you left money on the table, and what did you get in exchange?
Actually, could you elaborate on a question like that? Like in terms of like job offer or?
No, I think there's times where somebody has an opportunity to make more money than they're making. And so they pass up a particular opportunity in exchange for another opportunity, and there's a different type of capital, or there's a different type of value that's in that decision that's making up for leaving the money on the table.
So I would say between Mitro and Lauria, I had multiple offers that to leave and be pretty senior level at other companies, some young startups, some like large tech firms, at cash that was well larger than anything I was making. So that is, part of it. I mean, at the end of the day, there's still a financial reason of like, oh, well, this is something I started. I have equity. This is my baby. And I see a huge payout at the end. That's not why you're doing it. But I'm just saying that if you want to say financially, you would play that in the back of your mind. But the reality is the reason why I was making the choices where, I love what I'm doing, who I'm doing it with, how we're approaching things. And I don't want to make the jump to another company.
Yeah, and the fact that you had such a tight-knit relationship with all the folks from Mitro living in that house together was part of why you were able to raise money on your next endeavor.
Yeah. Yes.
What's the last book that you read that changed the way you saw something?
Trying to think of the last few books I read are all fiction, so they haven't changed the way I saw something.
Or like mind benders.
No, so that's the thing is I used to read a lot of those. So like when all the Malcolm Gladwell's novels would come out, would digest them. Freakonomics, like all of those big books when they were coming out in like the early 2000s, like 2002 to 2006, I couldn't get enough of them. But now I've whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, just have not digested those sorts. So now it's more, if I'm going to read, I'd rather do it for more for pleasure. And like, I want to read a book that gives me a good laugh or gives me.
Cool. I'm interested then. I've started to read a little bit more fiction than usual. So is there anything that you've enjoyed?
Yes. I mean,
you don't remember the names?
I can't think of it. It's like the girl who changed the king of Sweden. I think it's the girl who saved the king of Sweden. He's an amazing author that writes actual real narrative history and politics. The girl who saved the king of Sweden.
Okay.
That was a fantastic book to read, David. I think you would like it. And it mixes in like real history, historic events and politics with a very fictional character.
So you can learn while you're being entertained.
Yes.
Do you make your bed?
Kristine wishes I did. So no. So yeah, we have, fortunately, this is one of the really nice things of living in Singapore. We have something that helps us with Rocco, a little baby. We have a second one coming. And then it helps with all the household chores, which is life transforming.
Yeah. And do you have a final message for our listeners that kind of summarizes what we've talked
Kristine
about?
Kristine does make me make the bed sometimes. Kristine does make me make the bed.
But you're not somebody who's like, well, I make sure I make the bed every day because that's how I keep myself, start the day with a win and keep myself successful.
No. My thing to start the day is do not look at email. Your brain is strongest in the morning and don't waste it on somebody else's questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't look at the email till maybe noon or something. And it's part because my brain does good work in the morning, but it's also my brain is very vulnerable in the morning, meaning that if I start looking at the email, then I'll just be looking at email.
It's over. Yep.
And so do you have a final message to kind of summarize our lessons today?
I would just say, yeah, what we talked about and things that I've always gone on. Well, here, I'll finalize it with what my dad always said to me, and it never resonated until I was older. You can do whatever you put your mind to.
I feel like I've heard that one before, Vinnie.
Okay, cool. I don't think my dad invented it, but he would say it to me. I want to say like on a every other week basis, like no matter what I was doing, he would just always say it to me. So it was just like driven into my head, and it's he repeated it so frequently that it has had a profound effect on the way I view the world.
It kind of reminds me of when I was doing the Insanity fitness program, and Shaun T, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Shaun T the whole time is like, you can do it. And I'm like, man, that's really cheesy. But then eventually you're like, yeah, he's right. I can do it. So it just got programmed into your brain, and now you believe it. Yes,
it was exactly. It was the repetition. It was from my dad. It wasn't, me hearing it on TV. It wasn't, and it was the repetition of just hearing it all the time and hearing it at the right time. That's why it was something that just was rattling around in the back of the head, and then never even consciously thought about it until I was much older. I was like, wait a minute. My dad always used to say that to me.
So I think we have a lot of like really wise observations from today. And I think that you'll probably, you're not somebody who's typically out on social media a lot, even though you're meeting a lot of people. But I think you're probably going to get some new fans. So if they want some more Vinnie Lauria, where do they go?
So Twitter would be V Lauria, Lauria. Happy to answer any questions or comments that people want there. And then that's probably the most easiest social way to interact with me.
Great. All right. Thanks so much for taking the time today, Vinnie.
David, thank you. This was fun.
Love Your Work is supported in part by Treehouse. Take your career to the next level and learn from over 1,000 videos created by expert teachers on web design, coding, business, and much more. Claim your free 14-day free trial at cadavy.net/treehouse. You'll be supporting the show. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Vinnie Lauria of Golden Gate Ventures. To hear more about accidentally finding your career while traveling, check out episode 23 with Jody Ettenberg. She quit her job as a lawyer to travel, and now she's an independent food and travel writer. And if you appreciate all the work that goes into making this show, there are a couple of ways you can help support it. One is to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just hit the subscribe button. Another is to rate the show on iTunes. Just go to cadavy.net/iTunes and click on write a review and click on the star rating. You don't even have to write a review. It just takes a couple of seconds. And do you like books? If you do, I'd love to send you my book recommendations. About 90% of them will be nonfiction on subjects spanning from biographies to neuroscience. Just go to cadavy.net/reading, sign up, and you'll get my first set of recommendations right away. You'll be supporting the show if you buy any of those books through the links in the email. This has been Love Your Work, and I'm David Cadavy. The theme music for the show is More Streets, performed by Spiderflower. Love Your Work is a production of Cadavy Inc.